Welcome to Sankofa Summer School. It is our final week of the 2024 session, and I'm really excited that we are able to, continue to just bring you this. It has been amazing, this whole time, and I'm really excited about it. Today, we are going to be doing something a little bit different. Usually, it's just kind of like one person giving a class, but today I'm going to do a little bit of an overview of our topic, and then I'm going to bring in a guest, a very special guest today, who's going to join us for this conversation. I think it's an extremely important conversation about Black mental health care. And so welcome to Sankofa Summer School, and let me get my slides out. All right. So today we are, we called it, because we've been listening, we try to stay relevant, right? You got Kendrick Lamar, Song of the Summer, Not Like Us, and was really thinking about this this idea that, it has so many meanings for me. One, folks don't see Black people as being able to experience mental health, struggles and disabilities. They pathologize us a lot. The way they talk about mental health is very different from how we often experience it. Treatment things are different or what have you. And I just kind of was just like, kind of also playing on this idea that a lot of us unfortunately have that, psychiatry and all stuff related to mental health is for white people. So just kind of thinking about that, but also the disillusionment of Black mental health care. And I am focusing on the United States this time. So I hope that you will tune in and join me. Yay. All right. So I am going to issue some content warnings. We have done this a couple of times with Sankofa Summer School because, there's a lot of this stuff, this material can be very heavy, especially when you're talking about anything related to race and racism, right? We are going to be discussing psychiatric care. We are going to be discussing involuntary medical care. And we're going to be talking about racism and mental health care bias. Okay, hold on one second. Let me just make sure that I got this. All right. So I like to read this statement and we like to share this because I want to make sure people understand that this class is coming from an Afrocentric perspective. And Dr. Molefi K. Asante developed Afrocentricity as a theoretical framework in the 1980s. Since then, brilliant scholars have expanded the Afrocentric paradigm, giving us a template to guide our educational praxis. Simply, being Afrocentric means centering Africana people in their own narratives and making them the subjects, not the objects, of other people's stories. For most of us, our learning experiences have been primarily Eurocentric. We learned that European ways of knowing and being are the best and universally applicable. Afrocentricity challenges this notion of European white supremacy and encourages us to center ourselves as Africana people first and foremost. We take this approach because it is empowering and it is the truth. And when it comes to our relationships to psychiatry, mental health care, especially within the United States, this idea of Eurocentric, universal ways of being and knowing definitely comes into play. So out the box, we just gonna talk about it. Let's just talk about it because I talk about this a lot. I do a lot of public speaking around the issues related to social work and mental health care. And one of the things I talk about often is that psychiatry is racist. It's inherently racist, right? And I say that about a number of disciplines simply because when you think about the foundations of how they all were developed, they focus primarily on white cisgender heterosexual men and basically decided that what works for them works for everyone else, right? All right. If we keep it in the United States, because I could really talk about the Europeans, I could talk about Freud, I could talk about all those folks, but we don't have a lot of time. So I am going to keep it to American history, United States history. So we think about Benjamin Rush, right? He was a signatory of the Declaration of Independence, former Secretary of the Treasury. He was Princeton educated when it was called the College of New Jersey, and he actually graduated from Princeton at 14. So he was not an uneducated person. He's a very, very smart man. He is considered the father of American psychiatry, and he was a politician, philosopher, chemist, medical doctor, did all these things. Had some controversies on some of the decisions that he made, as a doctor, but, people still holds him in high regard. He was a human trafficker, though. He was an enslaver. And he even went so far to say that Black people had darker skin because we have a mild form of leprosy. Okay. And when you say something ridiculous like that, you're just like, what? Like, how could somebody say that? But the truth of the matter is, and I mentioned this in another class that I did for Sankofa Summer School, the institutionalization of racism was happening when these white men were getting together and basically just coming up with ideas about who they think we are, right? He actually later became an abolitionist. He had grown close to someone who passed away. He said this person visited him in a dream with all these African people, I guess, ready to kill him. And he woke up and decided to be an abolitionist. Listen, whenever you want to join us, it's great. But racism at this time is becoming institutionalized in Europe, in the United States. Medical racism is becoming a thing. We start getting the eugenics movement and all these ideas of like what makes a human a good person, right? And of course, mental health and the way we think factors into it. In 1840, the census begins to include a demographic or a category of people called insane and idiotic. Okay, this becomes a thing, and this becomes a way that people are now going to be designated on the census because they want to know how many people they think have mental health disorders and disabilities. He wrote medical inquiries and observations upon the diseases of the mind, and which is considered like, the text that kind of kicks it all out. He's from Philly, it's all that, all right, cool. He had a mentee named Samuel Cartwright, and he came up with one of the most racist theories in American history. Okay, some of you have heard this word before, some of you have not. That is fine. He practiced in the antebellum South. Psychiatrists like him would use words like primitive and savage to claim that African Americans were unfit to be independent and a full citizen, especially during the Reconstruction. They started writing all these things because what do they do with a group of people who were formerly enslaved? You were allowed to control them, what have you. Now they're free. What do you do with them? So in order to kind of create this narrative and maintain white supremacy, they started coming up with these theories about our ability to reason and our ability to think and function well in an intellectual society, right? So he comes up with this thing called Raptomania, and he actually has two theories, but the first one, the most popular one, is called Raptomania. And he said the cause in most of the cases that induces the Negro to run away from service is as much a disease of the mind as any other species of mental alienation, and much more curable as a general rule. With the advantages of proper medical advice strictly followed, this troublesome practice that many Negroes have of running away can be almost entirely prevented, although the slaves be located on the borders of a free state within a stone's throw of abolitionists. So, and this comes from his writing Diseases and Peculiarities of the Negro Race. He basically said that if you were enslaved and you wanted to run away and escape enslavement, you were mentally ill, because it was not acceptable. Like, it was not a normal thing for an enslaved African or African American to want to leave enslavement. Therefore, if you got notions of wanting to be free, you were mentally ill. And sometimes I like to pause with that, like, and allow us to absorb the absolute absurdity of that, right? These are the same people who in their Constitution and Declaration of Independence and all this stuff talk about the human right to pursue life, liberty, and happiness, right? Liberty, freedom, all those things, but not if you are enslaved. If you want liberty and you're enslaved, you're mentally ill. And that carries out to this day on how people, with how people interact with us. Another one is dysesthesia Ethiopica. It's weird, but whatever. It's basically a mental laziness accompanied with some physical symptoms. He says it is much more prevalent among free Negroes living in clusters by themselves than among slaves on our plantations, and attacks only such slaves as live like free Negroes in regards to diet, drinks, and exercise. So basically, he also came up with this idea that that if you are free, and this is accompanying Drapetomania, if you are free, it is likely that you are going to suffer from this freedom. Like you got too much time on your hand, and you're pretty much going to probably be lazy, and you're probably going to sit on your butt a lot. So then you're going to start to get lesions. Like this is how they were talking about us. And I get, sometimes I give you the information and I get frustrated, but this is kind of what it is, what's happening. And actually, let me turn off my stuff and put on the do not disturb. I apologize, y'all. So yes, we're dealing with that. And then we have to start talking about the inherent racism of psychiatry. And this is where it gets really interesting. I can make a blanket statement and say that psychiatry is racist. And you'll be like, oh, what are you talking about? Weren't we supposed to be getting more Black people to see psychiatrists and things like that? One, when psychiatry was becoming a thing, right? The majority of the patients and study participants were white men, right? So when you really just think about this, if all of your understanding of the human mind comes from what you understand from white men, and then you take that and apply it to everyone, it is going to be inherently racist. It is going to be inherently sexist. And we can break it down even more. It's going to be anti-queer. It's going to be xenophobic. It's going to be all these things because they're ultimately just trying to understand and treat the white man's mind. And so if you are a Black, queer, trans woman going to see a psychiatrist and they are giving you a diagnosis that is based on the mind of a white, cisgender, heterosexual man, I'm sorry, like you kind of have to start questioning some things, right? And again, I don't want anybody to get the sense that I'm just kind of like throw the whole thing away, although that'd be nice. What I'm saying is that you have to understand how racism kind of constructs how psychiatry, was functioning. The people providing care have largely been white men. You all have, I'm not preaching to the choir sometimes, but you all have understood how medical racism exists and what has been done over the years, right? To really keep diverse practitioners out and to make sure that these folks are controlling things, right? You have a Eurocentric universalism in medical care, and that's inherently problematic. Still, to this day, we are still dealing with people who believe that Black people have a higher threshold for pain. It's 2024, and this is still a thing, right? Psychiatry, unfortunately, and I think to its detriment, although I think it's getting better, it denies the legitimacy of spirituality and the impact on the lives of African Americans. And the reason I bring this up specifically, this is not for me to make a comment on people's religions and things like that. However, if you are a culturally competent care provider, you must consider the impact of spirituality and the supernatural, right? And so when we come from an Afrocentric perspective, we understand that for like thousands and hundreds of thousands of years, we have had these spiritual experiences and our connections to each other and to this kind of supernatural realm. For you to treat me and give me a diagnosis without considering the importance of that, even so much as my faith in God, right? So we have, there's sections of, psychiatry that are talking about if you believe that you talk to God, that could be a symptom of, a psychiatric disorder. And it's like, well, wait, hold on. Because how did African Americans survive enslavement? For the most part, by having faith in the supernatural and connecting with the supernatural, right? It also erases African psychiatrists and thinkers from education and practice. And this is a really important part. As I said, if the people providing the care are largely white men and the study participants and the people that have been treated have largely been white men, then when you erase African psychiatrists who are coming in and kind of offering an alternative, idea about this, that maintains the white supremacy. Now imagine if people had more access to these thinkers who are starting to challenge this Eurocentric, universalism, right? Part of what we have dealt with has been the weaponization of, and I put lack of mental health care, put lack of in parentheses, because I do think that that is It's the other side of the same coin. These are both two sides of the same coin, right? Lack of mental health care is weaponized, and mental health care has been weaponized, right? So racial stereotypes have influenced psychiatric diagnoses. Off the rip, you already know that's a problem, right? This leads to misdiagnosis and overdiagnosis of certain conditions. For example, symptoms of distress or discomfort that like African American patients may have can be misinterpreted as aggression or criminality rather than legitimate psychological issues. And that's because they see us as criminalized, right? So if you already see us as criminals first, that's where you go, right? And you all can think of many examples where that has come up, right? African people have been disproportionately subjected to psychiatric medications and treatment, right? And the problem with this is that it's often used as a form of control rather than for genuine therapeutic purposes. This includes the use of powerful psychotropic drugs, involuntary commitment, right? That can be extremely damaging, right? And then if you are trying to diagnose someone based on criteria meant for white, cisgender, heterosexual men, and then you're giving people medication based on your understanding, what is happening here? Like, I can't even get into this. I could literally teach an entire semester of this stuff. I'm only giving you a little bit of a touch because, I think that this is important, right? Mental health care often lacks cultural competency. And I will say that we are getting better. Bless all the people who have, over time been like, yo, this is messed up. The APA has been, has apologized and has tried to make amends for their role in perpetuating racism in this care, right? And cultural competency, like you can't get an MSW these days without taking classes on cultural competency. Like that's beautiful. Back in the day, that wasn't a thing, right? But this leads to inadequate understanding and treatment of mental health issues within our African communities, right? This lack of sensitivity and understanding can result in ineffective or harmful treatment approaches. Again, go back to what I said about spirituality. If you have a Black cisgender woman who has a strong faith, Christian faith, and believes in the saving redemption of Jesus Christ, and then she comes and she's talking to you about feeling hopeless and how she prays every day, and you dismiss that, right? And you just kind of throw that away, then you're not able to help this person because you lack the cultural competence. Understand what I'm saying? African people are often criminalized rather than able to receive appropriate psychiatric care, right? Mental health crises can lead to encounters with criminal justice system where the focus may shift from providing care to punishment. And I'm telling you, I've seen it firsthand. There are some times where I'm like, if I wasn't a barrier, I don't know what would have happened, right? If we look back into history, in asylums in the South, African Americans were involuntary committed for some of the most ridiculous reasons, right? And I guess my fear as I think about it now is that one, it still happens, but two, that we can revert back to these practices. The more we remove cultural education from, schools, the less diverse people's understanding of each other is, and the more likely people are to engage in this kind of behaviors. But one of the most ridiculous things that I read about was a British man of African descent who happened to be in the United States, and he was committed because he had an accent and they said he sounded funny. Like, you feel me how ridiculous is? They said his accent, even though these are the folks that they descend from English. They decided that his accent was weird and therefore there's something wrong with him. Okay. So when we enter the scene, right, I want to make sure that people understand that we have had prominent Black psychiatrists and psychologists who have wanted to study our minds, and were doing so through cultural lenses that they technically weren't even allowed to have, right? I want to bring that up again. We are studying this in modern times, but I want to make sure you understand that historically, we have been denied the ability to even make assessments that are based and rooted in cultural things because it's considered illegitimate science, right? Anytime African people and people of African descent try to enter into these disciplines and say, hey, let's look at this from the point of view of the African person, then it gets dismissed. Junk science, right? They say abnormal psychology. That's another one, right? The studying Black people's minds was once considered abnormal psychology. Again, the insidiousness of this racism, right? But we have Dr. Solomon Carter Fuller, was one of the first Black psychiatrists in the United States. Dr. Fuller conducted important research on Alzheimer's disease, okay? And look at these dates, 1872 to 1953. He was doing a lot of other neurodegenerative conditions. He was a pioneering figure in psychiatry and neurology. Hopefully people that are going to school or learning about Dr. Fuller in Psych 101 won't hold my breath. Then you have Mamie Phillips Clark and Kenneth B. Clark. Okay, so she's, Dr. Clark was a psychologist, mostly, kind of looking at segregation in Black children, right? And that's where the Clarks come in. They were awesome. They started looking at the psychological effects of segregation on Black children. That was instrumental to the Brown v. Board of Ed Supreme Court decision, right? And then Dr. Kenneth Clark, he was very much on thinking about racial identity and prejudice and kind of how that works into shaping social policies. And then also he was understanding the psychological effects of racism. Again, these folks are coming out doing this extremely important work, going through the South and things like that, and they are being dismissed, right? Because people are not thinking about Black folks in that way. Dr. Alta Stewart, still with us. She's known for her mental health advocacy. She looks a lot at the racial disparities in mental health care, and definitely has been looking at mental health issues in marginalized communities. You've got Dr. William Greer, co-author of the book Black Rage. Dr. Greer focused on psychological impact of systemic racism on Black people and communities. And then you have Dr. Joy Drugray. I always mispronounce her name. She came up with post-traumatic slave syndrome, which looks at the impact of generations of slavery and Jim Crow and racial oppression on the minds of Black people today. So currently, we've got some stuff going on, right? 2020, suicide was the third leading cause of death for African Americans between ages 15 and 24, with men meeting their fatal end 4 times more than women. This is something that should be extremely alarming. If this were the case for white men, I'm telling you, and I hate to have to do that comparison, but you have to understand that so much of why African Americans struggle in this space is because of stigma and because of discrimination and things like this. Between 2011 and 2021, a period of 10 years, Black Americans or African Americans saw a 53% increase in suicide rates, and that was primarily among men, right? We're looking at ages 15 to 24. Those are kids. No disrespect to folks that are watching that may be 22 years old, but I'm significantly older, and we look at you all as kids. This is terrifying. What is happening with our young brothers that they are taking their lives at such, increasing rates, right? 2019, Black females in grades 9 through 12 were 60% more likely to attempt suicide than non-Hispanic white females of the same age. We have to look at what is going on with our girls, y'all. Like, it's getting younger and younger and younger, right? 16% of African Americans report having a psych disability, and with only 39% reporting receiving help. And we know that there are many reasons for why we don't receive help that include inadequate access to affordable and applicable, mental health care, a lot of stigma within our communities about seeking help for mental health issues. Sometimes religiosity gets in the way. Insurance doesn't often cover it, and finding culturally competent therapists is really difficult for a lot of people, and I understand that. And I remember when I was leaving the field, people are like, "No, we can't lose another person," but it happens, right? African Americans with severe depression are more likely to be misdiagnosed as having schizophrenia, and that is a study out of Rutgers. This is also incredibly important because this has a disproportionate effect on Black men. I remember reading some studies that showed that Black men and white men with identical symptoms, the Black men were twice as likely to be identified as having or diagnosed with schizophrenia than the white men. Excuse me. Now, why would that happen? Remember what we talked about, the weaponization, right? To label someone as having schizophrenia is a very specific diagnosis, one that does evoke some fear in others. And so they shield white men from having that label to kind of preserve the hierarchy of white masculinity. It isn't that the white men don't have the schizophrenia, or it isn't that the Black men don't necessarily have the schizophrenia. It is just that the Black men are twice as likely to be diagnosed when they need to be catching more of the white men, right? So they can get them the help that they need. Only 2% of psychiatrists are African American or Black in the United States. For a population that is like 13.2%, I think we are, that is abhorrent, okay? Black children are often misdiagnosed with conditions like oppositional defiant disorder, and do not get me started on that, or schizophrenia due to systemic biases leading to inappropriate treatment approaches. This is awful. It is absolutely awful how Black children are treated from kindergarten. Okay, they start with the IEPs and their assessments of our children. They are labeling them as having, these psychiatric disabilities, and they're often wrong. And so our children are kind of railroaded into a system that has already pathologized them as being disabled and, intellectually inferior or unable to reason. And that kind of goes back to the history. Again, a couple of hundred years ago, they were saying that we lack the ability to reason and we cannot be trusted and left on our own, right? Then you have artists like Megan Thee Stallion, who, she starts talking about anxiety, right? I hope that you all can hear this. I love this because I'm a
bad bitch and I got bad anxiety. People call me rude because I ain't letting them try me. Saying I'm a hoe because I'm in love with my body. Issues, but nobody I can talk to about it. They keep saying I should get help, but I don't even know what I need.
So anyway, I was getting my little Megan Thee Stallion jam. But she comes and she's talking about anxiety, right, at a time when, young people are starting to connect with this idea that maybe something is not right. And so she gives a voice to it and she gives a name to it and she puts it out there so that people can actually start talking about it in some healthier ways, right? And I love that. I loved that. And so I, at this time, would love to kind of talk a little bit about why I no longer do this work. I got into social service. I would say starting even in undergrad, but immediately after undergrad, I went back to New York City and began working in social services. And I was working in housing and homelessness and mental health and things like that. What we learned was that 1 in 2 people in New York City who were houseless likely had a mental health diagnosis. So I knew then that this was something serious. And then I began working as an administrator, running supportive housing programs for people who had what we called severe and persistent psychiatric disabilities. And we use the language of psychiatric disability because we wanted to start changing how we talk about this. And if we can talk about physical ailments and diseases and things like that as disabilities, we believe in doing so for the mind as well. And so that was like super important. I began to realize that there were problems in the top-down approach to helping people. And my issue was that at the top of the social work and therapeutic spaces were all these white people that were lawyers and MBAs and all those things who were making decisions about what was primarily Black and brown people receiving care and how they should go about it. And as somebody who was initially providing direct care and then moving into administration, part of what motivated me to move to administration was like, I got to say something here. There's like, what y'all are saying is it's racist, it's classist, and it is culturally incompetent. And as much as you want to help, you're missing a lot, right? So that was when I started really becoming aware that perhaps social work exists to maintain the status quo. And so I started digging into that. Ultimately, I had a really bad experience at my last job that, kind of forced me out, but I was already burnt out by then. And so burnout is real. And it comes from having had so many experiences working within that space where it's just like, you know what, I got to a point where I was leaving work almost every day and heading to the bar to self-medicate. And I knew that something was wrong, right? But now I get to go around and I get to speak at different places and talk about, racism within this care, care system, the so-called care system. I get to talk about, and it gets kind of tricky sometimes because I'm speaking to audiences that are predominantly white. And I am telling them that the work they're doing is inherently racist. That is very hard for somebody who has a PhD, right, in psychology, or, is trying to provide this care, and they've been doing all this stuff for so long that they don't want to hear that what they're doing is racist. And then here I come and I'm like, well, it is. And let me break it down. And it's eye-opening, and people love me for it. But I was just like, I actually have to pull back from the direct work, and I have to go and educate, and I have to go and train, and I have to kind of meet the top level providers and the people who run these organizations. I have to start talking to them about this stuff, right? So ultimately, that's what I shifted. So now I'm going to bring in a guest to our stage. I'm going to introduce to you Asaads. It's so funny. Let me pull up your bio, because you all have to understand, this is one of my best friends, right? And so I could sit here and like freestyle one for you, but she did give us a bio. It's not my story.
You can freestyle if you want.
No, I'm
not that long.
We're gonna be serious. We're gonna be serious. Asaads Todd, pronouns she, her, is a mental health advocate whose transparency about her own journey with mental illness has been the cornerstone of her activism on the subject. On top of writing about her bipolar disorder diagnosis in her blog, lithiumtolashes.com, she also volunteers as a speaker for the National Alliance of Mental Illness in Our Own Voices program. In speaking openly and candidly about her own struggles and triumph, she hopes to inspire others to seek treatment, improve the current mental health care system, and reduce the stigma that holds us all back from being our best selves. I'm so honored that you have joined us here, because I'm also a consumer of mental health services. I have psychiatric disabilities. And I think that was also another reason of why I was just like, what are you people doing here? Like, it's not the help that we need. I remember, because there are two diagnoses I have that Black people tend to not get. One is anorexia and one is agoraphobia. And me as a provider, as somebody who has studied this stuff and has been providing counseling and therapy and treatment for people, was struggling with accepting that, right? Because of my own stuff, right? So I wanted to be able to have this conversation with someone who can speak, as you said, with transparency about this. So why don't you just kind of like introduce yourself a little bit and kind of tell us a little bit about your story? Like,
Okay, so I'm Asa. I have had a fairly long career path leading to me not working. I actually did start out working in social services. And
I'm sorry, like, y'all, okay, you have to understand, we do this stuff, we love each other, and it's jokes, and I'm like sitting here trying to make sure that I can amplify her voice, and I'm pulling her out. But we're here. This is a good time. So anyway, go back to it. I love you, sis. Sorry.
I started out working in social services, and also noticed a lot of what Michelle had said about the problems within the system. And I've burned out quite early and moved on to other things. And my mental health deteriorated so to where my psychiatric disability has left me unable to remain employed full time. But with that, I have had a lot of extra time now to be an advocate and be a vocal advocate without worrying about employment issues in that regard. So I have had a my journey with my mental illness and my mental health started a lot younger than most people's. I was formally diagnosed at the age of 12, and that diagnosis, of course, changed over years. I was first diagnosed at 12 with schizoaffective disorder, which, if you know the diagnostic criteria, and doctors don't want to give that to anyone under 18, but 12-year-old me was schizoaffective at that point. But
Wait, what? I didn't
yeah,
know this. 12?
yeah,
No, we don't do that.
exactly.
Okay.
And over the years, my diagnoses have changed. Bipolar was the one that stuck at around 18, 19, and it's the one that fit me the most. And after that, more were added on, ADHD and post-traumatic stress disorder, from a compounding of many things. One being my treatment within the mental health care system. When we talk a lot about it, in terms of the racism that is what's baked into the system, it's one of those things that is hard to address, with people who do not want to see it as such. It's the same as when we talk about racial microaggressions. There is always that plausible deniability, that providers do have and take on, as to say, well, are you sure it was because of your race? You look disheveled. I have natural hair. I have afro. You automatically assume dishevelment and not keeping up with activities of daily life because my hair is in its natural state, or I am not presenting cheery enough because that angry Black woman stereotype gets amplified within mental health care settings.
And I
So
want to pause real quick. So can you explain what activities of daily life are? Because some of the things that you're saying, I know what you're talking about, but maybe our audience doesn't. So can you talk about like what that is and what it means in mental health?
Activities of daily life are basically the things we kind of take for granted of doing daily, such as hygiene, grooming, being able to feed ourselves, being able to take care of our bills, and the things you do in life that keep life going.
Okay. Okay. And that's something that when you are seeking care or you're being treated, it's a measurement of your what? Like your ability to function, I guess, or
lucidity. It's a measurement of how well I'm doing. Am I a threat to myself if I do not appear to be taking care of myself in the way that people deem appropriate?
Ooh, and so that's loaded.
Yeah.
Right. So you mentioned the natural hair, but I can imagine that when bias comes in, you not living up to a particular standard as a Black woman would, yes. Okay. Thank you for sharing that. Okay.
And then when we also speak to bias, I want to take it back to when I was younger and my parents were concerned and they did reach out for help. They were asking for psychiatrists, therapists, counselors, the school board to get an IEP, and that raised red flags, and Child Protective Services were called for parents wanting to get help for their child. There was an assumption there that they had done something to hurt me.
Okay. And I want to pause really quickly to make sure that people understand that there is a racist history within Child Protective Services that has disproportionately harmed Black families, where white social workers have come into our communities and into our homes and have disrupted our families and torn families apart based on their racist assessments of care and what they deem neglect. So I really want to make sure that people understand that there is a historical racist precedent for this kind of behavior. And unfortunately, our people have been on the negative receiving end of that kind of stuff. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. And if it wasn't for the relative privilege that I come from, I probably would have been taken away, but I have parents who are college educated, held very high positions within their companies, and scared the hell out of administration, organizations, and were not afraid to confront what was right in front of them and call a thing a thing.
No, and that's, again, so we've got so many intersections. You can't talk about race, you can't talk about gender, can't talk without talking about class, right? And so people that don't know, we have a podcast that we do together called Black Girl Missing, and in it we talk a lot about how class factors in, you know, to how people respond, right? So it's like you've got to have this respectable like career and money and speak certain ways to even be able to advocate and be taken seriously, and that is awful. That is just awful. Okay, so can you talk to us a little bit, maybe give us a day in the life or a week in the life of, you know, of you? Like, what is life like for you? Okay, you wake up, you text your group chat.
Yes, obviously.
You send cat memes to us. You are the video lady, okay? Yes. But then what do you do after the group chat?
The thing about a daily life for me, it's very hard to pin down a routine for me because of the ebbs and flows of my mental health. So a good week, a day, a week in my life is text the group chat, ongoing, making breakfast, going outside, going to the gym, going skating, doctor's appointments upon doctor's appointments, because on top of the mental health stuff, I have a litany of chronic illnesses. Going to see my parents, talking to my sister on the phone, you know, kind of just everything that anyone else would do outside of also having a job.
Right. And so you have worked.
Oh yeah, I have worked, but it is extremely hard to maintain full-time or even part-time work in an exceedingly ableist society that does not view employees as living, breathing human beings. Instead of they see us as just output machines. And when I am upfront and vocal about I need a less of a workload, or I need to take leave, there is always a way that I am somehow either pushed out of the company or fired for some made up BS that is much harder to litigate. I did win a settlement from a previous employer for wrongful termination.
Wrongful termination. I know that was a journey. That was a journey. What made you pursue that? Because so many people won't. What made you pursue that?
Anger. It was anger, and the fact that I had kept as much documentation as I had. Because at first I was just going to chalk it up to the game, but I was angry and hurt that once again I was being discriminated against because of my mental health. And my work has always been stellar. I've always been an asset to every company. The numbers didn't lie. I was making them money. But as soon as I hit a rough patch and was honest about it and asked for accommodations, suddenly I'm put on a PIP. Suddenly I'm no longer being invited to meetings. Suddenly my workload is changing, but not because I asked for a less of a workload, but because they're trying to phase me out and prepare the others for when I'm gone.
You know, and I thank you for sharing that aspect of it, because there are people that are going to watch this who are employers and providers and managers, right? Who maybe have not received the kind of training they need in this regard. I've been a manager most of my career, a director of some. I've done a lot of hiring or whatever, and I've gone out of. I worked for one organization where our like goal was to make sure that 51% of the workforce had a psychiatric disability, because that is just kind of what we stood for. And so with that comes, intense training about family medical leave, and when people need to alter their work schedules, work from home if they can, those kinds of things, like way before we started talking about that, as it related to the pandemic. But that's not common. That is not a common thing. And so if there was like one thing you wanted somebody who was a manager or hired to, or somebody who hired to know, somebody asked, what is a PIP? That's a performance improvement plan. So yeah, we got to be careful not to use acronyms. We got to remember that not everybody knows, everything. Yeah, PIP is a performance improvement plan. But what would you want them to know if they hire someone like you who is doing the work, right? And maybe has a period, or sometimes we call it episode, where things, maybe you need a little more support. Like, what would you say? What's one thing that you would tell them? Or what are you people like yourself looking for?
My first instinct is to say that explanations are not excuses, and me explaining that this is going on isn't me asking for special privileges. Accommodations are also not special privileges. It is what we need to do our work. But also, these episodes are fleeting. We will be back to that person that you hired. All we need is that extra support for this short period of time. We are not dangerous to our coworkers, because I was treated as if I was going to, quote unquote, go postal, and access cards are shut off immediately. Everything that your access to your emails are gone within the blink of an eye, and you're not allowed to come into the office to get your stuff. They will mail it back to you. You're treated as a criminal for being sick. And
yeah, I was going to say that.
Yeah, it happens in the workplace. It happens within mental health care treatment. It happens in schools. The criminalization without the court system of people with mental illnesses is something that needs to be discussed and stopped, as we are more likely to be victims than we are to be perpetrators. And looking at us as people going through something, no matter what it is, we're not scary individuals. We're not looking to harm anyone. We're fighting ourselves at this point. And I think that's something that isn't recognized. It's so many times it's framed as attention seeking. It's framed as dangerous. It's framed as spiritual warfare. It is just us kind of fighting for our lives internally, and it's not treated as such.
Gosh, I mean, as I'm listening to you, this is a random, not really random, but it's I thought Sankofa's summer school exists in part because of my psychiatric disability, because during COVID, everything was work from home. And I was like, it's my time. Like, I actually felt for like the first time in a really long time in my adult life that like, I was like, I get the opportunity. I'm going to school online. I can be in my house. I don't have to leave, right? I can kind of do this thing and be comfortable. And I created the school, and it was like, yes, access. Wow, let's do this virtually. Anybody anywhere can do this, and then I can stay at home, And I have to share that with people, because I want people to know that, like, I've spent most of my adult life being embarrassed by the fact that I live with agoraphobia, especially because I'm a public speaker. Like, that doesn't make any sense. So, when we have these kinds of conversations, I think what ends up happening is that people are starting to see the humanity of, Black people who are living with these things that when we watch TV or watch films, they make it seem like it only with white people. And that's what's interesting. It's like, you talk about being diagnosed with schizoaffective and you have bipolar disorder, more and more we're having conversations about mental health and things like that, but we kind of limit it to depression and anxiety, right? And we'll have those conversations, about those kinds of things. And even then, we go a little far. Everybody's always like, oh, get therapy. You need therapy. And I'm like, so for me, I'm like, which kind of therapy should this person
Yes.
get?
Which modality are you talking about?
What modality are you talking about? Because people don't know much beyond, just the talk therapy and things like that. It's like, oh, well, what other kind of treatment? Because we need more treatments.
Right. And also, I think we have to have these conversations in a more nuanced way, because very often we see the anti-psychiatry movement versus the psychiatry is the only way. And everyone has valid points. I am not anti-psychiatry, but I am someone who says we need to clean this shit up. We need to clean it up. We need to have to really look at its racist roots, how it is still being perpetuated, and how we get to a more holistic and understanding of various cultural differences and how they manifest, whether they are actually dangerous or not, or harmful to self or others, and how we treat people. Because whether it's in a social work organization, whether it's in the hospital, whether it is in schools, we're still looking at that power imbalance where someone is looking down on you and not seeing you as a whole person, but as a diagnosis, as someone to be fixed or cured or thrown away and hidden. So we have to look at it as a collaborative relationship between providers and clients, and we're not seeing that enough. And that's why we have people seeking help, being harmed, and no longer seeking help anymore. This is why we have people going in with one diagnosis and coming out with PTSD, because they have been irreparably harmed by the mental health care system. Whether it is medication, whether it is involuntary commitment, whether it is the courts getting involved and now they are following your every step and mandating what you can and can't do outside of a hospital, it is dehumanizing.
And I'm thinking about, you just said something that made me think about this, like, as somebody who's a provider and working with people with benefits and things like that, you also are kind of like forced into poverty, right? Because there's so many limitations. They have not adjusted the cost of living and the allowances that, people who maybe receive Social Security, there's limitations on how much you can have in savings and then the value of your possessions and where you can live and things like that. Like, there's all these kinds of restrictions that it's like, well, I need these supports to function. And if you take them away, just because I got a job, for example, now I got a job, yay, I'm happy to have a job, but now I've lost my food stamps, I've lost my housing subsidy, I've lost all these other things. But then if I am fired from the job or let go, or I have to quit 3 months later, now you've got to go back and apply and go through the cycle all over again. And that cycle has like financial blowbacks for people, correct? Correct? I know you've had experience with that, yeah?
Yes, I am on disability. I've been on disability since I was 18. And I have always tried to work. I've had many jobs and none have been able to stick because of my mental illness.
But you did stick with me for a while because you used to work for me.
Oh yeah.
You was with me for like 2-3 years.
And then I got another job that didn't stick. But
she got a job and she left me, y'all. I just want to point it out. She left me because I was happy with her.
But there is our quote unquote social safety net disincentivizes people from living a full life. Between the income caps that wouldn't allow you to work anywhere that would meaningfully impact your mental health. Because I know capitalism sucks, but sometimes work does make you feel good about yourself. And plenty of people on disability do want to work, but they don't want to work for pennies, and they don't want to work in jobs that are just soul sucking or beneath their cognitive abilities. Because if you go to, say, the Division of Vocational Rehabilitation and you go to them for services to help you find a job, they aren't equipped to find people like myself employment. They are primarily working with people with developmental disabilities, cognitive delays, things such as that. And that's great and meaningful work, but you are missing out on a whole segment of people with disabilities. I have a bachelor's degree. It took me quite a long time to get it, but I earned it. And I don't want to work stocking shelves. I don't want to wrangle shopping carts. Those are primarily the jobs that you are offered when you are seeking assistance. Then there are the income caps and limits, and how invasive that process is, where the government is tracking every little bit of income you have, whether it's a gift, a cash app from someone, a windfall from a settlement, anything like that is up for scrutiny. And you have to think that that also impacts how many people go into more illicit forms of getting income that are under the table, aren't tracked, because they cannot risk losing health insurance. They cannot risk losing that disability check that may be able to pay just their rent, but nothing else. So the whole social safety net part, it's a misnomer, really. It's barely safety. It barely keeps you afloat. There is so much anxiety that comes with it. The fear of receiving a cash gift, and what's going, like, is it going to put me over the threshold? Am I going to miss out on a whole disability check because I was $2 over that monthly income threshold? How do you tell an employer, I can't take on extra hours even though I would like to, because I can't make more money, because then I will no longer be able to get my disability benefit?
I mean, golly, you know, because I've been on the other side of that. So I used to work for an organization. I'm not going to mention them here, but I actually quit because I didn't like how they were treating the people, the disabled people that they hired. It was their whole big thing. We hire disabled people. Da, 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 da. Yeah, but you pay them $2.15 an hour and you have them washing walls. Like, that is not dignified. And there is dignity with work. One of the organizations I worked with was like, the dignity of this, like, people who want to do this, they should be able to do this. We have a question from the chat. It says, was the doctor who diagnosed you at 12 a white male? And do you feel like you have a doctor now that listens to you and respects you?
Yes. That was a white male that diagnosed me at 12. My current psychiatrist, I am so thankful for him. He is not originally from the US. He is from South America. Lovely, lovely man. Actually listens to understand what I'm going through, and does not take my refusal of certain medications as quote unquote non-compliance. He understands that I know my body well. I know when I can't handle side effects. I know when certain medications, I'm not going to last that waiting out period of certain medications. He advocates for me on behalf of when it comes to talking to the insurance company and making sure that I'm still able to get the treatment that I desperately need to be okay. He is someone who I don't know where I would be right now if I did not have this particular psychiatrist.
Is this somebody whose name you want to drop their name or something? Or I don't know. Like I just feel like this is like wow.
I mean, I don't know if he can do any more, if he's accepting any new patients because he's
because sign me up. Okay, we have another question for you. What effect did the school situation with CPS have on your parents? Did they keep you in public school? That's a good question.
I actually ended up going to an alternative high school after going to an intensive therapeutic middle and high school. But it did make them more wary about how they worded things, who they let into the family business. And it definitely made, particularly my mother, a much fiercer advocate, not just for me, but for other children and families, to the point where she created a nonprofit that is still running today, that offers wraparound services for families of children with mental health disorders.
That's beautiful. We have another question for you. Hey, so what do you do for self-care and hobbies, and what is your bachelor's in?
My bachelor's is in psychology. And
yeah,
of course. Self-care and hobbies. I know it doesn't sound like it, but sometimes my self-care is just being a loaf in my bed. I have so many doctor's appointments that I have to go to that sometimes just being in bed is great. And I also skate. I do inline skating and quad skating, both on trails and in rinks. At one point, I was doing Brazilian jiu-jitsu and kickboxing, but my chronic illnesses got in the way of that, and I've had to, I'd like to say, put that on pause instead of quit. And my friends, having the friend group cultivating the friend groups that I have has been invaluable, because I think we're all in some way either neurodivergent, have a mental illness, or are very close to it. So it doesn't feel laborious in terms of trying to explain things to people, to them.
We have another question from the chat. The person asked, what is wraparound service?
So wraparound services are kind of where it's like a one-stop shop of services. So you will go to this organization, they will have social worker that sets up finding psychiatrists, therapists, working with the school district on IEPs. Also, if there are other services needed for the extended family, because it is, when one person has a mental illness, it does affect the whole family. So they put them in contact with services to also offer therapy to the immediate family, that would be siblings and parents, making sure, also offering support groups and trainings for parents so that they are not getting caught up in the child protective services, that they are making sure that all of the boxes are checked so that there is no way that we can say that they are neglecting their child's mental health needs, and just putting them in contact with who they need to be in contact with. If they are food insecure, they will give them either, because some food banks require vouchers. So vouchers to food banks, getting in contact with employment services if that's an issue for the parents. Just making sure that it is approaching this holistically, where because there's always going to be multiple moving parts to any family dynamic, particularly when a mental illness is involved. So being able to have all of that coordinated for the family, and it lifts a weight off of their shoulders, because they don't have to do this all themselves. They don't have to continually reach out to psychiatrists and therapists to see if they can get them on the schedule. So it's a way that parents can really help care for their child by caring for themselves and taking some of that administrative burden off of themselves.
And I'll add, as a provider, this also applies in the adult mental health care. My first job was working with senior citizens, and so we also, we provide that what we call wraparound care. And so somebody comes in, right? First, you want to meet their immediate needs. If they're hungry in that moment, you got to get them some food in that moment, right? And that usually, when you talked about the food insecurity, it's like, yeah, we will connect you with pantries and other food services, but right now, you want to make sure that you have something to eat, because I can't do this intake assessment when you have an empty stomach. So it's like thinking about things like that. And then we get somebody in and we do the intakes to get an assessment of like, what do they need? And so we often have people, they want to find jobs. They need help getting their benefits in order. They need help getting, connected to a new psychiatrist, a new primary care doctor. They want to go back to school. They want to reconnect with their family. We've got people that will do all of these things kind of in a one-stop thing. And then we will coordinate with other agencies and other programs throughout a city to make sure that this person is getting a continuum of care, and we're not overlapping or duplicating services, that everybody's in conversation with each other about providing that care. And so that's just to add on as a provider to answer that person's question. And he's saying, your mom sounds amazing. This is fantastic. You're getting all the love in the chat on Instagram. They are loving it. So, people I think are extremely inspired by you. And I want to thank you, because it is, after, I feel like we could talk about this. We could make this like 2 hours long, because there's so much to cover here. But I just want to, again, thank you and extend, my deepest appreciation for you coming and sharing your experiences with Sankofa Summer School and with the students of the school, because this is not easy, right? I've run advocacy programs where we ask people to give their testimonies, and it's never easy. And every single time, can be triggering, can be upsetting, could be all these things. And so for you to come and to share that, we are deeply honored and appreciative of that. That you're sharing this with us, because it only helps to make people better when they listen to folks like you, right? All right. So I'm going to send you backstage, and I'm just going to do my little spiel. Hey, everyone. Sankofa Summer School is a virtual school that I started a few years ago. We are providing, these kinds of classes, these kinds of conversations to help educate people and to bring us back to our center. This is Afrocentric. There is nothing more Afrocentric than having a Black person talk about their experiences directly and not being analyzed or assessed by someone else, but they get to tell their own story. Sankofa Summer School, you can donate to us. I have the banner at the bottom. You can go directly to our website, SankofaSummerSchool.com/donate, or you can donate directly to me, as I pay everybody. So Cash App is Fem Jones. If you're on Venmo, it is also Fem Jones. Please go to Sankofa Summer School. We've got 2 more classes this week. We had a total of 11. You can go to our YouTube channel. If you're watching us on YouTube, please make sure you like this video. And you can check out all of our other classes are on our YouTube channel at Sankofa Summer School. And get this knowledge, get this education. We have had a variety of topics, some dynamic, outstanding classes this semester. So we hope that you join us. And, we've got a few more. So hope some of you will see, the rest of this week. Thank you ever so much for your support of Sankofa Summer School. We really appreciate it. We can't do this without you and the generosity of our donors. So thank you, everybody, for supporting us. And we hope to see you at the next class.